The Rescuers, An American Tale, The Secret of Nim, The Great Mouse Detective, Mighty Mouse, Danger Mouse, The Tom and Jerry Comedy Show. Why so many mice? Hi, I'm Dr. Panda, the only panda who ever stayed at Jerry's Airbnb. And in this video, I'm gonna talk about something that's been bugging me for a while. The insane amount of animated projects in the 80s that featured mice in main roles. Because the evidence that studios were obsessed with using these little guys in movies and shows is overwhelming. And it couldn't just be a coincidence. So I set out to dig into where this decade of the mice came from. And it turns out, it really wasn't a coincidence. Let's get started. First off, let me clear up a rumor that's gotten way too big. No. I'm not bitter about the lack of a decade of the pandas, so please stop saying that. Now that we've cleared that up, let's move on. It all started while I was revisiting the House of Mouse show for this video when something caught my attention. Mickey Mouse. I mean, he's probably the friendliest character in all of television and film, but, he's a mouse. Let's be honest, mice are not cute animals. Nobody wants to be in the bathroom, doing what you gotta do, and suddenly notice there's a mouse cheering you on. But Hollywood couldn't care less about that, could they? Oh no, because they hate you. Sorry, I got a little carried away. So, while I was thinking about how weird it is that one of the most beloved characters in the world is a mouse, I remembered something. Mickey isn't even close to being the only mouse character people love. So I started going over other famous mice from TV and movies. Stuart Little, Pinky and the Brain, this guy from Flushed Away. But soon I noticed that the more I went through the list, the more and more mice popped up that shared the same trait. They all appeared during the 80s. At first, it was just a fun fact, a quirky coincidence. But very soon, it stopped being funny and turned into something unsettling. So I decided I had to get to the bottom of this. And you bet I did. In the 80s, mouse protagonists weren't exactly a new thing. Mickey Mouse had already been around for 5 decades, and Jerry had been tormenting Tom for over 40 years. But they weren't all that common either. Let's just say mouse protagonists showed up in healthy, occasional doses, until that cursed decade changed everything. It's true that mice have certain traits that make them perfect leads. Something that, once again, had already been proven by Mickey, Jerry, Speedy, or Pixie and Dixie from the Huckleberry Hound show. For starters, being small animals, mice are the perfect underdogs, forced to face challenges way bigger and stronger than themselves. A David versus Goliath situation. And this is important because in screenwriting, the greater and more insurmountable the odds against the hero, the more satisfying the victory at the end. Who would have cared about the Smurfs if they were 10 times taller than Gargamel? In The Secret of Nim, the whole conflict happens because a mouse mom has to escape a field before the farmer starts the spring plowing. But if she were human-sized, the entire movie would lose its meaning. And if you think about it, we love victims in stories and we tend to side with them. In Finding Nemo, we root for Marlin because a barracuda ate his beloved and his unborn children, and because his only son was kidnapped by an evil diver. And in Lilo and Stitch, we empathize with Lilo because, among other things, she's bullied by Myrtle and feels completely alone. Mice are so small that they can become victims of countless animals and situations, and that's pure gold for storytelling. Related to that point, because mice are tiny, you can place them in huge environments that allow for both comedic and epic situations. Ever since I watched Flushed Away, I've kept this image stuck in my head of the underground city and the sewers, built by mice repurposing giant human objects. You probably wouldn't get that same effect if the protagonists were, say, lions. Okay, fine, yes, this guy's a rat, not a mouse, but you get the point. And while it's true nobody wants mice running around their house, it's also true that they're easy to make look anthropomorphic and cute in design, unlike hippos, snakes, or cockroaches. Mice have big eyes, round ears and bodies, and they're small and seemingly harmless, making them great for children's movies. They're also quick and agile animals, which means they're perfect for adventure or action stories. Okay, Dr. Panda, mice are the best protagonists in the world, but why did they star in so many movies specifically in the 80s? Well, turns out we have a culprit. This man. And to understand why, we need to go back to the movie that kicked off this whole mice fever. The Rescuers is a Disney animated film that came out in 1977, and it tells the story of Bernard and Bianca, 2 mice who are members of the Rescue Aid Society, an international mouse organization dedicated to helping abduction victims around the world. The pair of mice must rescue Penny, a 6-year-old orphan girl who's been captured by 2 treasure hunters planning to use her to steal a giant diamond. Yep, this is not your typical Disney movie. The story of the turbulent production behind this film is really interesting, and the only reason it was even able to be released was, ironically, the death of Walt Disney. In 1963, a Disney story artist named Otto Englander picked up a book written by Marjorie Sharp called The Rescuers and decided to try adapting it into an animated feature. The story went through a lot of changes to make it more suitable for a theatrical audience, eventually turning into a family-friendly spy adventure where Bernard and Bianca had to rescue a free-minded poet from Cuba. But of course, with the world deep in the Cold War, Walt Disney decided the story was way too political and shut down the project. The film stayed forgotten for a few years until Walt passed away in 1966, and that's when The Rescuers got a second chance. The script was reworked, becoming the darker but politically stripped-down version we know today, and the animation team finally started production. But here comes the key part. Ron Miller, who was an executive producer at the company, and also Walt Disney's son-in-law, though I'm sure that had absolutely nothing to do with how he got the job, decided it was crucial to start giving younger animators real opportunities so the Disney legacy could continue with future generations. The Rescuers became the perfect project for this mission. A younger animation staff would handle the production with the supervision of the senior team. And among that senior team was none other than Don Bluth, one of the great legends of Disney and animation as a whole, who had already worked on projects like The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, The Aristocats, and Robin Hood. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. The infamous way he walked out of the company in a furious rage. Don't worry, we'll get to that in a minute. The Rescuers was released on June 22, 1977, and quickly turned into a box office success, pulling in over $48 million against a budget of just $7 million. But while everything looked bright on the outside, inside Disney's walls, things were shifting. The company's executives were growing increasingly concerned about profit margins. They began cutting costs, forcing animators to rely on cheaper techniques even if the results weren't as polished, slashing budgets, and tightening control over which stories got told and how they should be told. There were even rumors floating around that they were considering shutting down the animation department altogether and focusing exclusively on live-action films. This instability and excessive control by the executives made many animators feel uncomfortable at the company and start looking for other opportunities. And this was exactly the case for Don Bluth. The environment had become so tense, and the executives' control over the animators so dictatorial, that Don decided to leave Disney on his birthday, during the production of The Fox and the Hound, after having major creative differences with the executives. This led him to open his own studio, Don Bluth Productions, along with several other former Disney animators. Their first feature film would be The Secret of NIMH, a story about a family of mice. Did he decide to make it specifically because the protagonists were mice? Well, kind of. Turns out, an animator named Ken Anderson had shown Bluth the book Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH back when they were both still at Disney, hoping to inspire him to make a movie based on the story. The book followed a recently widowed mouse who lives with her 4 children in a field owned by a farmer. Her son Timothy falls ill with pneumonia just as the farmer starts planning for spring plowing, which will destroy their home. But since Timothy is so sick, the family can't leave the field. Fate leads her to encounter a society of rats that has a literate and mechanized society, with technology like elevators and heaters. The rat leader explains to the widow mouse that they were captured by scientists from the National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH. And thanks to the experiments they underwent, they became more intelligent, to the point of being able to read, write, and operate complicated machines. Bluth was fascinated by the book and showed it to Disney animation director Wolfgang Reitherman, repeating Anderson's pitch. But Reitherman's response was blunt, and a bit cruel if you ask me, telling him that Disney already had a mouse named Mickey Mouse, and that the studio had already made a similar movie about mice called The Rescuers. I mean, of course Bluth already knew that. He had literally supervised that film. So, since Disney hadn't allowed him to make the movie he wanted, he decided it would be the first one he'd produce at his new studio. And the result when it hit theaters was a moderate success. Critics praised the beautiful animation and the dramatic story, even comparing it to Disney's golden era. But its box office wasn't outstanding, mostly because it had to compete against big films like Disney's Tron and Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial. That moderate success, however, was enough for Bluth to get new opportunities, one of them being a collaboration with Spielberg himself. The project would be An American Tail, released in 1986, which tells the story of Fievel and his family of mice as they must emigrate from the Russian Empire to the United States in search of freedom. But the mouse gets lost, so he has to find a way to reunite with them. All of this in the Big Apple. The thing is, Spielberg's original idea was for the story to take place in a world where all the inhabitants were different animals and no humans existed, kinda like Disney's Robin Hood. But Bluth showed him The Rescuers and proposed a similar world building to that film, where secret societies of animals coexist alongside the human world. Spielberg loved the idea, and that's how yet another mouse movie came to life. Do you see a pattern here? 3 major movies starring mice, and the same person was involved in all 3. Disney itself would also decide to remain in the mouse race, because just a few months before An American Tail premiered, the studio had released The Great Mouse Detective, which is ironic considering they had previously rejected The Secret of NIMH precisely because it involved mice. Had enough mice already? You and me both, but we're not done yet. Because a year later, in 1987, at the CBS offices, animator Ralph Bakshi was meeting with the head of CBS's Saturday morning block, Judy Price. Bakshi had several project pitches to offer the studio, but for each proposal he made, Price's answer was always no. After a while, Bakshi ran out of pitches. Price asked what else he had, and Bakshi responded with 2 words: Mighty Mouse. CBS was very interested and agreed to purchase the rights. But as soon as he left the meeting, Bakshi called his partner and urgently told him to find out who owned the rights to Mighty Mouse. He had lied about owning the rights to the cartoon and answered on impulse, recalling his early years as an animator on the original series, and probably also influenced, at least subconsciously, by the boom of mouse protagonists in recent years. The thing was, his partner discovered that the owner of the Mighty Mouse rights was actually CBS itself, which had bought the entire Terrytoons catalog in the 50s, but had completely forgotten about it. And so another mouse appeared in 80s animation when Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures, the revival of the character from the 40s, was launched in 1987. The mouse fever was far from over at this point, as this was followed by Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers in 1989, which featured a couple of mouse characters in supporting roles, Gadget and Monterey Jack, becoming another case of Disney using mice even after having told Bluth they were done with them. Then came The Rescuers Down Under in 1990, which became the first animated film sequel theatrically released by Disney, as well as a sequel to An American Tail, actually 3 in total. And let's not forget Biker Mice from Mars in 1993. It all started with this man. I had been wondering for a long time why Mr. Toad is everywhere in Disney media if his movie came out over 70 years ago, and few people remember it as much as others from that era, like Pinocchio or Dumbo. But I finally found the answer. Why is Disney obsessed with Mr. Toad? I made a video about it, and you can check it out right here. Subscribe for more. Dr. Panda out.